In the news this week, Mark McGowan urged by activists to spend extra billions to wipe out WA's homelessness. A WAMN News exclusive.
Meanwhile, another homeless death on Perth's streets sparked protests this week. WA tightens border restrictions with new categories and vaccination requirements. Plus, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment.
This is The Evening News with Ivan Leung and Sarah Smit.
Good evening. The recent spike in rough sleepers dying on the street has put pressure on the government, with activists demanding Premier Mark McGowan to spend an extra $2 billion in the upcoming state budget to wipe out Aboriginal homelessness. Other activists, on the other hand, are demanding even more. Nelson Leung with this exclusive report.
Perth homelessness continues to be a major issue, and with the state budget coming in several weeks, Aboriginal activists are demanding extra funding to wipe out homelessness.
It's only to start addressing homelessness properly.
Nullamaya CEO Mervyn Eads has urged Premier and Treasurer Mark McGowan to allocate an extra $2 billion for housing and wraparound services to get all Indigenous homeless people off our streets.
Do that by starting off with a $2 billion spend on building houses, on top of the $1 billion that you give for the services to do the short term. But the $2 billion must go towards long term through building houses.
He says the funding is needed to ensure the well-being of homeless people in Perth.
Of the $2 billion, at least $1 billion on Aboriginal housing to start addressing the First Nations homelessness and the street-present homelessness in Western Australia.
The National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project's Jerry Georgatos has backed the calls, but says a total of $5 billion is needed to eliminate homelessness and housing issues entirely.
$1 billion will probably meet all unmet need for First Nations applicants, families in wait. So what Mervyn's asking for, I validate. What I'd like to see is the whole $5 billion surplus spent on meeting all unmet need for all sisters and brothers, First Nations and other West Australians, and a significant proportion are also migrant-born.
Meanwhile, Premier Mark McGowan has responded, saying the state government has already invested $100 million on homeless services.
We're spending $100 million on homelessness services. We just opened a new homeless shelter in the heart of the city. Those opportunities are there for people, and I'd encourage people in this situation to take advantage of the opportunities that are open to them. It's very sad what occurred during the course of the week, but we have services and facilities that are available, including new ones. I'd encourage people to take advantage of them.
The state budget is set to be handed down on the 9th of September. Nelson Leung, WAMN News.
A demonstration was held this weekend following the death of a homeless woman outside Perth train station. Flowers and tributes poured in during the week, with the victim's family and members of the homeless community expressing their grief over the tragedy. Helene Fung reports.
The homeless community expressed their outrage after another woman passed away this week on Perth streets. A homeless woman in her 30s has died outside Perth train station around Thursday night. Flowers and tributes pour in as family members expressed their grief.
Well, that's coming from the people on the streets. They cannot do any more, but by giving flowers and setting this up, that's in remembrance of this young woman that they were known for so long, you know.
Over the weekend, members of the community held a protest from Perth train station to Parliament House. They sat down on the streets along the way, wanting their message to be heard.
Just heartbreaking that we continue to put particularly young women in their 30s on the streets here of Perth. Now, in a day and age where we're putting $1 billion from the federal government into closing the gap, and we're still having young women die on the streets of Perth due to health-related issues, it's just not good enough.
Family members, on the other hand, hope that she will be remembered as a beautiful young woman.
I would like people to remember Jennifer as a beautiful young girl who tried and as a survivor. She stood up, you know, for herself, but the loneliness, depression and everything.
Helene Fung, WAMN News.
The state government is tightening the state's border even further, with New South Wales rivals required to provide evidence of at least one COVID-19 vaccination. The new rules will apply to high and extreme risk states in Australia, with the measures coming into effect this coming Tuesday. The conditions of entry will include a negative COVID-19 PCR test 72 hours before departure, proof of at least one vaccination dose, a requirement to use the G2G Now app during quarantine. Extreme risk category arrivals will also be required to complete 14 days of mandatory hotel quarantine in a state facility, with an additional COVID-19 test on day 5. Extreme risks exemptions will be restricted to Commonwealth personnel and specialist functions only.
The situation in New South Wales is very serious, and our hard border arrangements must reflect that and reduce the risk to Western Australians.
The Refugee Rights Action Network in WA claims a Tamil family in Perth will continue to live in limbo after the High Court rejected a visa appeal for the family's 4-year-old daughter. The court rejected a special leave request from lawyers representing Tharnika Murugappan on Thursday, with no more legal options for the family to stay in the country. Group spokesperson Sam Wainwright says the family's future is now uncertain, but he hopes the Immigration Minister will use his discretion to grant permanent residency.
Look, the government says that their intention is to deport the family, so we can't rule out that possibility, and obviously the refugee rights movement will be mobilising as much as it possibly can to stop that from happening. We'll even be standing there picketing at the airport, whatever it takes, to stop this family from being deported. I'm hoping it won't come to that. The government has been under a lot of pressure on this issue.
Frustrations remain among WA nurses in Perth Children's Hospital, with rising concerns about immediate impact of limited staffing. Nurses met with the Australian Nursing Federation WA this week to discuss their concerns about systematic issues created by low nurse numbers. Despite McGowan government's funding plans to boost recruitment, ANFWA State Secretary Mark Olsen says the government's recruitment plans work for the medium and long term, but urgent staffing pressure needs to be addressed.
What's breaking my heart right now is that there are things this government can be doing right here, right this week, next week, the week after that, that will deliver the nurses and midwives that we need in WA.
Southern Europe is facing one of its hottest heat waves, with Spain breaking its national record with a scorching 47-degree day, and parts of Italy and Portugal hitting 40 degrees as well. Bushfires are already burning in Greece, Turkey and Italy following several days of extreme high temperatures. Local governments are urging residents to look after elderly neighbours, especially those living alone. The United States have evacuated around 3,000 diplomats as the Taliban makes significant gains against the Kabul government in Afghanistan. It comes following the recent withdrawal of the United States military presence in the country, with President Joe Biden facing severe criticism over the move. There are fears of a humanitarian crisis in the long term, as the current government loses its grip of control.
NASA's Ingenuity Mars helicopter has successfully completed its 11th flight on the planet, with new photos of craters, sand dunes and other landforms. The latest photos sent back to Earth this week also captured the Perseverance rover in its photographs despite the long distance. Now, if you zoom into the photo near the sand dunes, the bright white speck is what the Mars rover looked from 1,600 feet away and 39 feet up the air. It's magnificent to see how big the picture and how small the rover is.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll be able to look for yourself when Elon Musk takes us all to Mars.
I'm not so keen to be stood up in a tin can for a few months, though.
That's fair.
Yeah. Anyway, here's AMAWA spokesperson Dr. Andrew Miller with his weekly COVID-19 update and commentary.
Hi, thanks for your time. Been another busy week, unfortunately, for COVID in the eastern states of Australia, and Western Australia having to respond by announcing a requirement to show proof of vaccination before coming into the state. This is the future now. We will need to be able to demonstrate that when travelling around and internationally as well. And good to see that this kind of technology is starting to be introduced already so that we can allow for essential business and personal travel, even during times of COVID outbreak where necessary, as long as people can demonstrate that they're not a danger through a combination of vaccination and, of course, rapid antigen testing. It's going to be another thing that's very important as well, so we can test large numbers of people in a short space of time. Not as accurate as the traditional tests, but when testing large numbers of people it does add an additional layer of safety, and that's what it's all about now. Additional layers. Vaccines one thing, ventilation another, masks another, rapid antigen testing. These are all things we're going to have to be used to for the next couple of years as we work our way through this pandemic. People are asking at what stage we can afford to open up, and there's some argument about that, obviously, with people having mentioned figures of, well, 50% of the eligible people vaccinated would be enough to start easing restrictions and forgetting about lockdowns. The evidence from the scientists is you're needing to be looking at more like 80% of the whole population, ideally 90%. And at this stage, we don't even have a vaccine for people under 12, for all of our kids, who of course can suffer and die from COVID, unfortunately. We are only just starting to vaccinate vulnerable people in the 12 to 15 year age group, and there's still very large parts of the over 16 population not vaccinated. So this is all a bit premature, particularly when we have a Delta outbreak in New South Wales that's proving to be very difficult to control for other states as well, including Victoria. And so we just need to get those vaccination rates up high. Great news that we've sourced another 1 million doses of Pfizer, and that's the kind of thing that we need to do to really get this program on track. We can, of course, be moving on with getting masks and ventilation sorted out. High-level N95 masks should be starting to become available for the community. And we need to have that conversation around schools as well, because there was this myth from early in the pandemic that schools were safe places to be. They're not. They spread a lot of COVID, and it's not safe for children. So I suppose in conclusion, we need to be putting the pressure on our political representatives to, as quickly as possible, explore the vaccine options and come up with a decision around the safety risk balance for vaccine for the 0 to 12-year-old age group, because certainly they're suffering a lot in jurisdictions like the US, Israel, UK, and so on. So we don't want to go down the path of New South Wales. We don't want to go down the path of the UK. Our Premier is quite right when he says that we need to keep this to zero community spread, and that that's the way we can continue to enjoy our freedoms while we reach out to help others. Thanks for your time.
And before we go, here is Leo with what's coming up on 6 News tonight.
Thanks, guys. And on 6 News, breaking news, New South Wales COVID case numbers show no sign of slowing down even as vaccination and testing rates continue to go up. But authorities have continued to reject any suggestion that they were too slow to lock down. Plus, the world reacts to how Australia is dealing with the COVID situation, some praising us and others mocking us, as Melbourne and the ACT continue their lockdowns alongside Sydney. And more major developments out of the Middle East overnight, with the Taliban taking one Afghan city after another. We'll speak to an ex-SAS soldier exclusively who served in Afghanistan to get his perspective. You can see full details on those stories and plenty more by heading to our YouTube channel. Just search 6 News Australia to find us, or our website 6newsau.com. For now though, guys, it's back to you.
Thanks, Leo. And that's our weekly news and current affairs. We have the latest news on our website, wamnnews.com.au.
From Sarah and myself, we wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Take care.